My name's Linda Carter, and the day my father retired was the day he buried my worth in front of 50 people. He gave our family business to my brother Jake, then laughed, saying teaching kids wasn't a real job. Someday, he'll see my name on every preschool in Denver and wonder how he missed what I was building right under his nose. Before we begin, where in the world are you watching from? Drop your city in the comments. I love seeing how far these stories reach. I wish I could say I saw it coming. The sky that afternoon was an impossible shade of blue, like it had been hand-painted for the occasion. My dad's retirement party was spread across the backyard of my childhood home, the one with the slanted white fence and that lopsided oak tree Jake and I used to climb as kids. String lights were already glowing beneath the porch awning, though the sun hadn't dipped yet, and folding tables bowed under the weight of catered food and Costco champagne. My mom floated between neighbors and old coworkers in a lemon-yellow blouse, proud and buzzy from too much Prosecco. Someone had made a slideshow of Dad's 35 years running Carter's Heating and Air, and every time a photo of him popped up, mustache thicker in some decades than others, people laughed and clapped like he'd cured cancer. I clapped too. Of course I did. I'd even baked the cake. Carrot, his favorite. With cream cheese, frosting, and little edible tools on tiny fondant hammers and wrenches, painstakingly shaped until 2 in the morning. I placed it next to the champagne like it mattered. Like I mattered. Then it happened. Jake stood beside Dad, one arm slung over his shoulder, wearing a blazer that looked like it had been picked out for this exact performance. My brother, Jake Carter, local golden boy, whose only consistent talent was showing up late and talking loud enough that people didn't notice he hadn't actually done anything. My dad raised his glass and tapped it with a butter knife. "Everyone," he shouted. "If I could have your attention." The chatter softened. Even the wind seemed to hush. "I just want to say," he said, looking around the yard like it was his kingdom, "how proud I am to hand over the reins to Jake. He's got the Carter spirit, the brains, the drive, everything this business needs." I smiled, brittle and practiced. Then he kept going. "And let's be honest," he chuckled, "teaching kindergarten, that's sweet, but it's not exactly a real profession." Laughter rippled through the crowd. Someone actually said, "Right, glorified babysitting." And there it was, that one sentence, that dismissive smirk, hit harder than I expected, like a punch that knocks the wind out of you but doesn't bruise. I felt the back of my throat burn. I didn't make a scene. I didn't cry, not there. I just excused myself, careful not to spill my drink, and slipped behind the garage. I stood between the trash bins and the garden hose, blinking fast and swallowing hard. What was I supposed to do? Yell that shaping young minds was harder than fixing a damn air conditioner? That my students called me Miss Linda like I was magic? That while Jake was busy networking at bars, I was helping 5-year-olds learn how to use their words instead of fists? I looked down at the frosting smeared on my palm from the cake box. Ridiculous. I'd worked so hard on something for a man who couldn't see past his son's borrowed charm. Jake got the business. Jake got the applause. I got what? Pity. A punchline. The music drifted from the patio, some cheesy 70s rock, and I could still hear my dad laughing. His voice had always been loud enough to fill a room, but somehow not enough to make space for me. In that moment behind the garage, I realized something. I would never be enough in his eyes. Not unless I changed the way he saw me. Not by begging, not by baking, but by building something so undeniable, so powerful that he'd have no choice but to acknowledge it. He gave Jake the empire. Fine. I'd build my own. And one day, maybe not tomorrow, maybe not next year, but one day, he'd regret ever calling my purpose. Not real. The next morning, I walked into Bean and Bloom Cafe like I'd just crawled out of a dust storm. Puffy eyes, no makeup, hair twisted into a bun that screamed emergency exit. My teacher friends were already nestled into our usual corner booth, sipping oat milk lattes and swapping classroom horror stories. I slid into the booth without a word. Nadia, my work wife from Jefferson Elementary, narrowed her eyes at me like a hawk on mouse patrol. "You good?" she asked. I forced a nod and reached for her scone. "Girl," murmured Belinda, who taught music and rarely raised her voice unless someone was hoarding recorders, You look like you wrestled grief and lost. I exhaled, then I said it. My dad gave the company to Jake. Chairs squeaked as everyone leaned in. And he said at his retirement party, mind you, that teaching isn't a real profession. Silence, the kind that's louder than shouting. Belinda blinked slowly. That man needs to take a nap on some Legos. Wait, he said that in front of people. Nadia asked, voice rising. I nodded. Well then, Nadia said, folding her arms, I hope he enjoys paying for Jake's mistakes because that boy couldn't organize a sock drawer, let alone a company. Laughter bubbled around the table. It felt like warm tea poured right over the crack in my chest. You're not just a teacher, said Jamie, the quiet one who ran special ed. You're the one parents actually call when their kid won't sleep or eat or speak. You don't just teach, you change lives. And that did it. The tears I'd choked back behind the garage. They returned now, sneaky and full force, in the safety of this circle. I wiped my cheek on a paper napkin and whispered, I've been dreaming of something for a long time, but I never said it out loud. Their eyes widened. No one interrupted. I want to open my own preschool, I said. A place where kids feel safe, loved. Where they're not just little numbers in a funding report. I want to build a place that matters. There, it was out. It floated between us like a fragile soap bubble, and I waited for it to pop. But instead, Nadia's hand found mine. You'd be incredible. You'd have a wait list by Christmas. Seriously, said Belinda. Parents love you. You've got a gift. I mean, I have no clue how to start, I added quickly, suddenly self-conscious. Licensing, insurance, property, money, it all feels so far away. Every big dream starts with small chaos, Jamie said, smiling. They didn't laugh. They didn't say be realistic. They just believed. As if my idea had always existed and was just waiting for me to catch up. Around us, the cafe bustled, baristas steaming oat milk, toddlers flinging muffin crumbs, the scent of cinnamon and possibility hanging thick in the air. My heart began to lift, not in some dramatic, movie-scored way, but like a balloon finally realizing it's not tied down. You could even call it Miss Linda's, Belinda added with a wink. I rolled my eyes. Please, I'm not putting my face on signage. Why not? Nadia said. You've got a trustworthy face and great arms. We all burst out laughing. The kind that shakes your shoulders and makes strangers stare. But something had shifted. I left Bean and Bloom that day with more than caffeine in my system. I left with a vision, a flicker of a future not built in Jake's shadow or my father's expectations, but in color and chalk and soft nap mats. I didn't know how I'd do it yet, but for the first time, I wasn't afraid to want it out loud. My grandmother left me her apartment when she passed. A little one-bedroom just east of downtown, with dusty curtains and a window that creaked when it rained. I hadn't lived in it, couldn't bear to erase her scent from the couch cushions, but I'd paid taxes on it every year. My mother used to call it a safety net. I sold it in 4 days. Cash buyers, no inspection. I cried once, just a quick, breathless sob in the parking lot of the title company. Then I handed the keys to a stranger and whispered, "Thank you, Grandma," into the wind. The money wasn't much, but it was enough to lease a squat little commercial unit in Aurora. One of those tired strip mall spaces wedged between a nail salon and a martial arts dojo. Faded brick, a dented metal door, and an interior that smelled like forgotten takeout. It was perfect. Not because of how it looked. God, no, the carpet was a crime scene of stains, but because of what it could become. Miss Linda's place. The name still made me blush, but every time I imagined it printed on a cubby or sung by a toddler in a circle time chant, it started to feel a little more real. I signed the lease, bought a cheap futon, and moved into the tiny back office. It was barely bigger than a walk-in closet, but I called it home. A place to crash when the painting fumes got too strong or when the hammering lasted past midnight. There was no glamour in it. I spent days scraping gunk off the windows, ripping up carpet with blistered hands, and dragging second-hand furniture from Craigslist sellers who looked vaguely concerned when I showed up with a borrowed truck and a folding dolly. I installed a sink with the help of a YouTube tutorial in pure desperation. I painted murals, big, joyful ones with rainbows and alphabet animals and suns that smiled with missing teeth. My knees ached. My back screamed. But the space slowly shifted from abandoned to alive. Every time I finished a task, I'd whisper, "One step closer." Some nights, I'd sit on the floor with a peanut butter sandwich and look around the room. The walls still smelled of primer. My fingers were raw, nails ruined. But I had never felt more alive. Because this was mine. No one handed it to me. No one gave me a title or permission or applause. I was building something with my own scraped-up hands. Still, there were moments of doubt. Like when the heating wouldn't kick in during a freak April snow. Or when I found a leak above the nap room. Or when the city inspector stopped by and handed me a list of regulations longer than a CVS receipt, complete with a frown that could have curdled milk. But I checked off each box, got the fire extinguisher, installed safety latches, measured nap mats precisely 24 inches apart. It was like building a castle out of broken bricks. One rule, one brushstroke, one floor tile at a time. And somewhere in between the chaos, I realized something. I wasn't just building a school. I was building proof. Proof that I was more than my father's footnote. Proof that Jake didn't get the last word on what success looked like. Proof that being Miss Linda could be bigger, bolder, and more powerful than any office title in my family's legacy. Every morning, I woke up on that futon and whispered to the ceiling, "Let this work." I didn't know if it would, but I knew deep in my gut that this dream had roots. And I was just getting started. I was painting a rainbow when the knock came. Well, technically, I was trying to fix the orange stripe. It had gone rogue, bleeding into the yellow like a citrus crime scene. My arm ached from hours of brushwork, and I had a paint smudge across my cheek I wouldn't discover until dinner. So when someone banged on the front door loud, impatient, like they owned the place, I nearly dropped the paint can. I opened the door with my usual mix of hope and suspicion. Was it another inspector? A curious parent? A wrong address pizza guy? It was none of those. It was Mr. Geller. I blinked. Principal Geller. He hadn't changed. Same blazer with the frayed elbows. Same wire-rimmed glasses sliding down his nose. He smelled faintly of school copier paper and cinnamon gum. "Linda Carter," he said, smiling wide enough to show a chipped molar. "Heard a rumor you were stirring up some magic out here." My throat tightened. Wow, I didn't think you even remembered me." "Miss Linda," he scoffed. "You think the woman who single-handedly got the Pearson twins to stop biting each other is forgettable." I laughed. Couldn't help it. He stepped inside, looking around like he was stepping into a sacred space. I watched his eyes take in the murals, the mini tables, the half-assembled reading nook. "You really did it," he murmured. "I'm trying," I said, quieter than I meant to. That's when he gestured toward the parking lot. "Got a surprise for you." I followed him outside, still in paint-splattered jeans, and saw a battered white van parked behind my building. The side door was open, revealing bins, dozens of them, labeled in permanent marker. Toys, puzzles, finger paints, manipulatives, books, blocks, even a laminated alphabet chart I remembered from the old school library. I covered my mouth. "These were bound for storage," he said. "Or the dumpster, honestly. The district's downsizing again. But I thought, well, if anyone could breathe life into them again, it'd be you." I didn't speak. I couldn't. My chest swelled with a feeling so fierce, so sudden, it scared me. Mr. Geller chuckled. "Don't cry, Carter. I'm too old to handle emotions before lunch." But I cried anyway, because those bins, they weren't just toys. They were validation. They were whispers from the universe that maybe, just maybe, I wasn't completely out of my depth. We spent the next hour unloading the van. There were wooden cubbies, real ones, not the flimsy plastic I'd been eyeing online. There were worn books with dog-eared corners that smelled like nostalgia. There was even a tambourine with someone's initials etched into the rim. By the time we finished, my classroom looked real. Not perfect, not polished, but undeniably real. Mr. Geller wiped his brow. "This place, when it opens, will be the kind of school parents pray for." "I hope so," I whispered. He turned to me, serious now. "Linda, what you're doing matters. It's brave, it's necessary, and it's going to change more lives than you know." I didn't know what to say, so I just hugged him. Quick, tight, no words needed. When he left, I stood in the middle of the room, surrounded by block towers and tiny chairs and decades-old alphabet books, and let the silence settle. For the first time, the space didn't echo with emptiness. It hummed with possibility. The first Monday passed quietly. Too quietly. I sat behind the small reception desk with a cup of coffee I couldn't afford and a hope I couldn't kill. I'd even worn my nicest sweater, pink with little tulips near the collar, thinking maybe that would make a good first impression if someone walked in. No one walked in. Tuesday, I repositioned the sign outside. Now enrolling, play, learn, grow, in cheerful rainbow letters. I moved it closer to the road just in case the angle was wrong. Maybe drivers were missing it. Maybe I needed balloons. I bought balloons. They popped within hours in the hot sun, leaving sad bits of color drifting across the parking lot. By Wednesday, I'd printed 50 new flyers, cuter fonts, brighter colors, my contact info in bold. I walked the entire neighborhood, sticking them on bulletin boards, grocery store windows, even the community center by the laundromat. I smiled at strangers, made small talk with parents, left stacks anywhere they'd let me. I didn't sleep much that night. I kept checking my email, convinced anyone, would inquire by morning. Morning came. Nothing. Each unopened message thread felt heavier than the last. Like the silence itself had weight. I'd never felt so ghosted by the world. Friday was worse. The open house banner I hung across the windows whipped in the wind all afternoon, but no one pulled into the lot. I'd prepped activity stations just in case. A finger paint corner, a reading rug, a little welcome table with goldfish crackers in Dixie cups. The goldfish went stale by 5 p.m. I dumped them into the trash and sat cross-legged on the floor beside the mural of dancing numbers I'd painted weeks ago. What if this was a mistake? I whispered to no one. The walls didn't answer. Neither did the universe. I started rationing groceries. Rice, beans, discount produce if it wasn't too bruised. I canceled my gym membership, skipped laundry days, wore the same jeans 3 days in a row and turned the hot water off unless absolutely necessary. I told myself I was being practical, but the truth, I was unraveling. And still, every day I opened those doors. Not because I had students, but because I needed to prove to myself that I could keep showing up, even when it felt like shouting into the void. There was one morning, a particularly bleak Tuesday, when I caught myself rearranging toys for the 3rd time just for something to do. I stood in the middle of the room, stared at the empty rows of cubbies, and felt this terrifying question rise up inside me. What if this is all it ever is? What if I stay invisible, just like at Dad's party? Just like I've always been. I sat down at one of the tiny tables, my knees pressed awkwardly beneath it and pressed my palms together. Not in prayer. In desperation. I didn't cry. I'd done enough of that. I just sat in stillness, surrounded by dreams that refused to bloom. The scariest part wasn't failure. It was the waiting, the slow, endless ache of maybe. I started logging expenses in a notebook. $13 for dish soap and paper towels. $28 for toilet paper and hand sanitizer. The numbers were getting smaller. My courage felt like it was shrinking right alongside them. But I couldn't stop. I'd already given everything. And even though no one else had walked through that door, I hadn't left either. And that meant something, didn't it? I didn't want to go back. The idea of walking into a school I no longer worked for, hat in hand, asking for part-time hours, made my pride shrivel like a leaf in frost. But reality has a way of flattening ego. My savings had thinned to lint, and even rice and beans were starting to look like a luxury. So I swallowed my shame, ironed my one presentable blouse, and showed up at Ashwood Elementary the following Monday with a practiced smile and my resume folded 3 times in my purse. The front office still smelled like hand sanitizer and pencil shavings. Mrs. Miller, the secretary, looked up and blinked in recognition. "Miss Linda." My cheeks burned. "Hi, I was wondering if Principal Chavez is available for a few minutes." She stood so fast her rolling chair squeaked. "Of course, wait right here." I hadn't sat in that office since the day I handed in my resignation with shaking hands and a hopeful heart. Back then, I'd believed I was stepping into something bigger, something mine. Now I felt like someone who'd lost a bet with the universe. The door opened. Principal Chavez emerged with his usual brisk walk and the exact same coffee mug he'd had for years, black with white letters reading, "Chaos Coordinator." "Linda Carter," he said warmly, extending his hand. "I heard about your new school. How's it going?" There it was, the million-dollar question. The kind people ask with good intentions but no idea how hard it lands. "It's getting there," I said, forcing a smile. "Actually, that's why I'm here. I was wondering if you had any part-time openings, even just afternoons or subbing." He didn't blink. "Of course, let's talk." He led me to his office, and within 15 minutes we'd worked something out. 2 afternoons a week assisting in the kindergarten classrooms. A modest paycheck, but it was something. Enough to stretch the days a little longer. I left the office lighter than I'd arrived. But nothing could have prepared me for what happened in the hallway. I just stepped outside the office when a blur of color barreled into my legs. "Miss Linda." Tiny arms wrapped around me. I looked down to see Liam Sanchez, 5 years old, eyes wide and grinning with 2 missing front teeth. He clung to my knees like I was Santa Claus, and the tooth fairy rolled into one. "Liam," I gasped. He nodded furiously. "I drawed you something." Before I could say anything, he bolted toward his cubby and returned with a crumpled piece of construction paper. On it, a stick figure with big brown hair stood in front of what looked like a rainbow. Above it, written in crooked block letters, "I wish you was still MYTEACHR." I blinked so fast my vision blurred. His mom, waiting nearby, stepped forward with a warm smile. "He talks about you all the time. When he saw you last year helping that scared little girl with her coat, he called you the kindest person in the universe." I tried to laugh, but it caught in my throat. Then another voice piped up. "Miss Linda." A girl I barely recognized tugged at my sleeve. "You taught me how to read the word elephant." I crouched, heart hammering. 3 more kids wandered over, then 2 parents. And within minutes, I was surrounded by memories I hadn't realized I'd left behind. Little voices, little faces, and big, unfiltered love. You think you're invisible until a child sees you like light. That afternoon, when I walked into room 2B to help with snack time, I was greeted like a returning hero. Hugs, drawings. A little boy who swore he remembered my banana song from Circle Time. I found myself smiling without effort, laughing without guilt, breathing like someone who still had purpose. As I drove back to my empty preschool later that evening, the setting sun turned the windows gold. And for the first time in weeks, I didn't feel alone. They remembered me. And maybe, just maybe, the world hadn't forgotten what I could offer. It started with a knock. Not loud, not urgent. Just 3 soft taps against the front glass, like someone unsure if they were allowed to be curious. I was in the nap room, restapling corner guards that had started peeling off when I heard it. At first, I thought I imagined it. No one ever knocked. But then it came again, tap, 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 followed by a hesitant voice. "Hello, is someone here?" I rushed to the front, heart hammering for no reason other than sheer habit. The same way your chest jumps when the phone rings after days of silence. 3 women stood outside, shielding their eyes from the afternoon sun. The one in front wore a blazer over leggings and held a preschool flyer, the very one I'd taped to a corkboard in front of the laundromat nearly a month ago. It was wrinkled and sun-bleached, but she held it like treasure. "Are you Miss Linda?" she asked. I nodded. "Yes, come in, please." They stepped inside like it was a chapel. One of them whispered, "Wow," as her eyes swept over the mural of alphabet animals. Another bent to inspect the tiny table set with wooden puzzles and picture books. "I'm Tasha," said the woman with the flyer. "This is Maribel and Dana. We all live nearby. A few of our kids had you back in the district school, and well," she hesitated. I filled the silence gently. "You're wondering if I'm taking any students." She smiled, relief and hope blending in her eyes. "Yes, we heard you were starting something on your own. We didn't know if it was ready yet." "It's ready," I said, and my voice caught. "It's been ready." They looked around again, slowly, carefully, like they were letting themselves believe. "This place feels like," Dana started, then paused. "It feels kind." I hadn't planned a tour that day. The hallways still smelled like lemon cleaner, and the nap room had 1 mattress missing a cover. But I showed them everything. The cubby wall Mr. Geller had donated, the art station with recycled paper, the quiet corner with stuffed animals donated by my cousin's old neighbor. Maribel knelt beside a low shelf of books and traced the spine of the snowy day. Her voice was soft. "You remember how to talk to kids, don't you?" "I try," I said. "I remember what it felt like to be small." When we returned to the front desk, I offered them paper forms and shyly mentioned my very flexible tuition rates. They didn't flinch. They didn't haggle. They just smiled. "We'll be back Monday," Tasha said. "3 kids, maybe more once the other mom's here." I couldn't breathe for a moment. "Really?" She laughed. "Miss Linda, my daughter, still prays for you at bedtime. Says your stories helped her sleep when her dad left." That's when I had to look down and pretend I was organizing pencils. They left with a wave and a promise to spread the word. And the minute the door clicked shut behind them, I let out the strangest sound, half sob, half laugh. I pressed my forehead to the cool glass and whispered, "Thank you." Not to them. To the room. To the dream. To whoever was still listening. That night, I turned on every light in the building, lit a candle in the reading nook, and played soft music on the speaker just because it made the space feel alive. I rearranged the bulletin board, set out juice boxes, and even baked banana muffins from scratch just in case. For the first time since the day I opened the doors, I wasn't pretending anymore. I was preparing for voices, for backpacks, for morning hugs and goodbye waves, for finger-painted chaos and storytime giggles, preparing for children. And when I looked around at the school I'd built from tears and grit and second-hand furniture, I finally saw what it had become. Not a failed idea. Not an echo chamber, a place of learning, of light, of beginnings. I didn't notice the puddle at first. The morning had been good, better than good. The 3 new kids were settling in. One of them, Josie, finally stopped clinging to her mom's leg and asked to feed the classroom fish. We sang "The Itsy Bitsy Spider" 5 times in a row just because they kept requesting it, and no one cried when it was time to clean up. That felt like a miracle in itself. After lunch, they all curled up on their nap mats with their tiny blankets and stuffed bears. I dimmed the lights, played the quiet music playlist I'd stitched together from YouTube lullabies and lo-fi Disney covers. It was the kind of afternoon that made every ounce of struggle feel worth it. Until I heard it. Drip. Just a soft plink at first, barely louder than the hum of the heater. Then another. Drip, drip, drip. I followed the sound to the nap room corner. At first, I thought one of the kids had spilled something. But when I stepped closer, the wetness crawled up my socks like ice water. My foot squelched. My stomach dropped. The floor wasn't just damp. It was soaked. I knelt down, lifted a corner of the rug, and gasped. Beneath it, a slick pool had formed, spreading from the adjoining bathroom like a dark stain of betrayal. "Please, no," I whispered. I rushed to the bathroom, flung the door open, and saw it. The pipe beneath the sink was cracked clean through. A jagged line running along its belly, gushing a relentless, cold stream that was pouring into my classroom like an uninvited guest. I didn't have time to think, just act. I scrambled under the sink, turned the main valve until it screeched, and finally the water slowed to a pathetic drip. The damage was already done. The floors were saturated. One of the nap mats was floating. I stood in the silence, water clinging to my legs, and realized this could ruin everything. The panic didn't hit all at once. It crept in slowly, like the water had. First, the realization that I'd have to cancel tomorrow's care. Then the memory that my balance, after buying snacks, new markers, and a pack of storybooks, sat at $17.12. Not enough to fix plumbing. Not enough to hire help. Not even enough for dinner. I backed into the hallway and slid down the wall until I was sitting on the damp floor. My hands were shaking. My chest felt hollow. For a long time, I just stared at the ceiling and thought, this is it, isn't it? This is where it ends. It wasn't just the pipe. It was everything. The exhaustion, the constant doubt, the invisible weight of having no safety net, no backup plan, no one swooping in with a miracle. I had given everything I had to this place, and all it took was one pipe to nearly drown it. Eventually, I moved. I couldn't let the water sit. I gathered every towel, mop, and rag I owned and got to work. The whole time, I was praying the kids wouldn't walk in and see it. The mess, the weakness, the version of Miss Linda that didn't have it all together. I scrubbed until my fingers went numb, hauled out the ruined rug, laid down dry mats in the office just in case someone showed up. I did it all with tears in my throat and fear gnawing at the edge of my resolve. And then, because what else could I do, I pulled out my laptop. I typed in emergency plumbing help for small business owners. No luck. Then microloans for women entrepreneurs. More promising. I spent the next 3 hours applying for every small business relief program I could find. I wrote about my vision, my students, the dream that wouldn't die even when the floor was soaked and my confidence had sprung its own leak. In one application, there was a question: what makes your business worth saving? I stared at it, then typed. Because it was never just about business. It's about giving children a soft place to land. It's about showing them and myself that even when the world feels hard and unfair, you can build something gentle, and it will matter. When I hit submit, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt tired. Not the kind of tired a nap fixes. The kind of tired that comes from holding up a building with your bare hands while hoping no one notices it's crumbling. I curled up that night on the futon with a towel under one corner and a bucket catching the last lazy drops from the pipe. And I whispered to the dark, "Please don't let this be the end." The nap room smelled like lavender again. Not mildew, not panic. Just lavender, and maybe a little bit of banana muffins cooling by the kitchenette. The pipe had been patched by a retired plumber named Al who responded to my community bulletin board post and said, "I like what you're doing here. Just cover my gas and we'll call it even." He left me with a patched-up bathroom and a hand-drawn invoice that read, "Miss Linda's dream market rate." That alone made me cry harder than the burst pipe ever had. But it wasn't just the plumbing. Something had shifted. Enrollment, slowly but surely, began to rise. It started with those 3 brave mothers. Word traveled fast through yoga groups, community Facebook pages, whispered conversations at drop-off lines. Within a week, I had 6 kids enrolled. The next week, 9. Some were shy. Others bounced in like they owned the place. One cried every morning and clung to my leg. Another gave me a dandelion on his first day and whispered, "I think you're nice." The sound of the room changed. The walls echoed with stories, giggles, and that one kid who could not resist yelling "potato" during quiet time. Tiny shoes lined the entrance. Backpacks piled near the reading rug. Parents texted me things like, "He's sleeping better already, and you're the only one she'll eat carrots for." I stopped sleeping with dread in my gut. Started waking up with ideas. I dusted off my binder of lesson plans, revamped the art station, repainted the weather chart with happier clouds and friendlier suns, even added a tiny indoor plant by the window, Miss Linda's tree, the kids called it, the futon in the back office. It became a couch again, not my bed, just a couch. I finally had enough saved to take a breath. And with that breath, I did something I hadn't dared before. I hired someone. Her name was Evie, 23, fresh out of her early ed program, all wide eyes and endless energy. She wore colorful earrings that looked like fruit slices and had a gift for soothing tantrums like it was an art form. The kids adored her. And I did, too. Having another adult in the room, another set of hands, another heart, made everything easier. We split snack duty. Took turns leading story time. She even brought in her own ukulele and taught the kids silly songs about brushing teeth and saying sorry. "I don't know how you did all this alone," she said one day while wiping applesauce off a table. "I didn't," I told her. "The kids helped, the silence helped, the falling apart helped." She smiled, even though I could tell she didn't quite get it yet. But someday she would. One Friday afternoon, after all the kids had been picked up and the building had fallen quiet again, I sat at the front desk with a clipboard full of names and numbers and waitlist requests. Waitlist. Me. I stared at the word like it was magic. Then I pulled out a sketch pad, the one I used to doodle ideas when the dream felt impossible, and turned to the back page. In pencil, I drew a simple outline. A rectangle, another storefront. Bigger, brighter. With windows that faced the park, room for more kids, more teachers. Miss Linda's place, location too. I laughed, startled by the boldness of it, but I didn't tear it out. I left it right there, pencil smudged and hopeful. Because it wasn't just a fantasy anymore. It was a plan. Thanksgiving always came with 2 guarantees in our family: dry turkey and Jake's annual victory lap. This year was no different. The moment I walked into my parents' house, still wearing my old winter coat and gripping a store-bought pie, I spotted Jake's new toy in the driveway, a sleek silver sports car so shiny it practically shouted, "Look at me!" I parked my dented Honda behind it. It groaned in protest when I cut the engine, the left headlight foggy with age. Inside, the house smelled like mashed potatoes and cranberry sauce and tension. Jake was already in the kitchen, leaning against the counter with a glass of wine in hand, retelling the story of how he closed the Hartman deal in under 24 hours. My father stood nearby, nodding with pride like he was being knighted. "There she is," Jake called when he saw me. "Little sis, you made it." I smiled. "Wouldn't miss it." He wrapped me in a loud, performative hug that smelled like cologne and salesmanship. Then he pulled back and gave me a once-over. "You still working that preschool gig?" I ignored the sting. "Actually, I run a full-day early learning program. We're expanding." "Nice," he said, already bored. "You know, if you ever want a real job, something with like bonuses, I could probably talk to someone." Dad chuckled. It was the same chuckle he gave Jake when he got a C- in algebra and blamed the teacher. I made my way to the living room, but not before overhearing Jake say, "Babysitting empire in the making, huh?" The words hit me in the back like a slingshot. I didn't turn around. I didn't snap. I just sat down at the kids' table, the only open spot, and placed my pie among the other desserts like it belonged there. Dinner followed the usual script. Mom asked everyone about work. Jake launched into another story, this one about a client dinner that turned into a yacht invitation. My father's eyes sparkled the entire time. When it was my turn, I spoke quietly. "We've had to open a wait list. We're hiring another teacher next month, and I'm scouting locations for a second school." Someone passed the gravy. No one said anything. No toast. "No, that's amazing, honey." Just the scrape of utensils on ceramic plates. For a moment, I thought maybe I imagined the progress. That it didn't count unless it sparkled like Jake's car or came with applause. But then my cousin's wife leaned over and whispered, "You're doing something real. Don't let them shrink it." I met her eyes, saw something honest there. After dinner, Jake insisted on giving everyone a peek under the hood. Half the family followed him out to the driveway, their laughter drifting through the open front door. I stayed inside, helping clear plates. As I scrubbed a pan in the kitchen, Dad came in behind me, drying his hands on a dish towel. "You know Jake's company is talking international partnerships next year," he said casually. I nodded. "You should really consider doing something with more growth potential, Linda. You've always had a good head, you're just wasting it on crayons and nap time." I turned to face him, calm, steady. "I teach kids how to speak their feelings, to love books, to try again when something's hard. I give parents peace of mind and kids a place to belong. That's growth, Dad. You just don't recognize the kind that doesn't end in a bonus check." He looked at me like I'd spoken another language. Maybe I had. But I didn't need his translation anymore. I dried my hands, thanked my mother for dinner, and slipped out before dessert was served. Outside, the wind was sharp. My Honda's door squeaked when I opened it. Across the driveway, Jake posed beside his car, retelling his engine specs for the third time. I watched him for a second, then got into my car, started the engine, and smiled. Because I knew something they didn't. The quiet ones don't stay quiet forever. The news came in the form of a group text. Jake's company, our family's company, was collapsing. The message was short. No explanation. Just a screenshot of a local business news alert with a headline. "Carter & Co. to liquidate assets following investment losses." Below it, a single sentence from my cousin Mark. Jake really messed up this time. I stared at it for a long time. Not because I was shocked, because I wasn't. It had always been a house of cards. Our father handed him the reins like a rite of passage, convinced that shared DNA was enough to substitute for discipline, empathy, or actual management skills. Turns out it wasn't. Within a week, the office closed its doors. Staff were laid off. My father stopped answering his phone. Jake's name stopped coming up in family group chats, replaced by awkward silence or vague mentions of tough times. And me, I had a plan. I'd been watching that building for years, an old warehouse-turned office suite in the heart of Aurora. Decent bones, massive lot, and now on the auction block. I stared at the listing like it was fate wrapped in drywall and debt. I called a lawyer. Asked if it was legal to bid on the business my brother had run. "It's a public auction," she said. "You have just as much right as anyone else." So I filed the paperwork. I met with my lender. showed them every ledger, every enrollment list, every glowing parent review. I printed color photos of the classrooms, highlighted testimonials, and laid out a growth projection that, if I'm honest, made me tremble, not because it was risky, because it was real. They approved the down payment. I didn't tell anyone, not Evie, not the moms, not even my best friend Nadia. It was mine to hold, and honestly, it felt good keeping something powerful to myself. On the day of the auction, I wore navy blue. Not black, not mourning, navy, clean, professional, like a woman who knew exactly where she was going. The room buzzed with energy. Other bidders whispered over spreadsheets. I sat alone in the third row, eyes fixed on the stage, hands steady. Jake walked in halfway through. Late. Disheveled. He wore a suit, but it looked tired. His hair wasn't gelled. His usual confidence sagged at the edges. He didn't notice me at first, but I noticed him. The moment he spotted me, his eyes narrowed, confused, curious, almost amused. He crossed the aisle and leaned close. "You lost," he whispered. I turned my head slowly. "No," I said. "I came to win." And when my bid was called and no one topped it, when the gavel slammed and the auctioneer announced the new owner, I didn't flinch. I stood, signed the paperwork, and walked past Jake without another word. I drove home in silence, parked outside my preschool, and cried for 10 minutes straight, not from sadness, from relief, from the weight that had finally slid off my back like a winter coat in spring. I didn't rent the Mercedes to impress anyone. I rented it to remind myself of who I'd become. The dealership handed over the keys like I belonged there, and for the first time in my life, I believed them. The drive to the old Carter & Co. building felt surreal. Streets I'd driven as a passenger years ago, watching my brother walk into offices that were once promised to both of us. Only one of us had ever been welcomed. Only one had keys. Until now, I parked right in front. No more side entrances. No more waiting in lobbies with forced smiles and polite questions about my little projects. The silver badge clipped to my coat read, "Owner." The doors opened exactly at 10. Inside, the staff sat in awkward silence around a long, polished conference table. I recognized some assistants who used to greet me like I was invisible. A few blinked when they saw me. One woman muttered, "Oh my God." Jake wasn't there yet. Of course he wasn't. He'd never learned to be on time when he wasn't in charge. I stepped to the head of the table and cleared my throat. "Thank you for being here. As you know, Carter & Co. has been acquired. I'm Linda Carter. I'll be leading the transition." A few people clapped, unsure whether it was appropriate. Others just stared. Then, 20 minutes late, Jake burst in. His jacket was wrinkled, his phone in hand. He froze when he saw me standing at the head of the room. His eyes flicked to the badge on my chest, then to the silence in the room, then back to me. "You're kidding." "No," I said, "I'm not." He looked around for support, found none, his voice rose. "This was Dad's company, this was supposed to be yours," I finished, calm as ice. "It was, and you drove it into the ground." A flush crept up his neck. "You're not qualified to run this." "I'm not here to run this," I said evenly. "I'm here to repurpose it. The building will become the next Miss Linda's Learning Center. We'll be hiring. You're welcome to apply." The room went still. I turned to the others. "Anyone who wants to stay and transition into early education administration, we'll train you. Salaries are protected for the first 6 months." Jake gaped. "You're turning it into a daycare." I smiled. "No, I'm turning it into a future." He stared at me the way people stare at earthquakes, disbelief, awe, fear. Then a voice from the back spoke. It was my father. He must have slipped in without me noticing. He stood in the doorway, hands in his pockets, watching everything unfold. We locked eyes. He didn't say a word, just nodded slowly. Once, like he was seeing me for the very first time. And just like that, the ache I'd carried since that backyard retirement party, the weight of being unseen, unheard, dismissed, began to lift. I turned back to the table. "Let's begin." A year later, the air in the Carter household felt different. Not lighter, not dramatically warmer, just different. There was space now, space between what had been assumed and what had been earned. And that space, like silence after a storm, felt holy in its own way. It was Thanksgiving again. I drove my same old Honda to the family home, but this time not because I had to. I parked beside a lineup of newer cars. Jake's wasn't among them. He was already inside when I arrived, holding a glass of sparkling water and discussing Q4 reports. Not his, mine. The room went quiet when I entered, not out of awkwardness, but attentiveness. Mom greeted me with an apron smudged in flour. "She's here." She called out, and I caught her glance over my shoulder like she was checking the room's posture. I didn't bring pie this year. I brought a stack of holiday art from my students, laminated with glitter glue and tiny painted turkeys. I placed them on the counter with quiet pride. "From my 4 campuses," I said simply. Jake looked up from the reports. He didn't smirk. He didn't deflect. He cleared his throat and said, "The staffing model you use for rotations. How are you managing hourly cost against early checkouts?" I blinked. Then I answered. He listened. Not as a brother trying to patronize, but as a man who'd been humbled. A man who had watched someone else do what he could not. Over dinner, my father raised his glass. "To the ones who build quietly," he said. My mother's eyes widened slightly, but she smiled. Jake glanced at me across the table. And this time, no one laughed when I talked about circle time, licensing audits, or toddler yoga. Jake passed me the gravy with a nod. "The Aurora campus is beautiful," he said. "You built something real, Linda." It landed softer than his past jabs, and somehow heavier, because this time he meant it. And I didn't need the applause. I already had enough. The preschool empire was thriving. 4 locations, a waiting list, and a new pilot program for emotional development that had local educators asking to observe. My teachers called me boss, but with a note of affection. The community called me Miss Linda. My students called me their safe place. And at night, when I turned out the lights in my office, I didn't wonder anymore if I'd made the right decision. I knew I had. My success wasn't a rebellion anymore. It was legacy. One I built with stained t-shirts, cheap coffee, grant applications, and thousands of story times. One smile at a time. At the end of the evening, as we gathered coats and kissed cheeks goodbye, my father lingered by the door. He held it open, hand on the frame like he had something he needed to say but wasn't sure how. Then softly he said, "You made this family proud, Linda." I gave a small smile. "I didn't do it to make you proud." "I know," he said. "That's why I am." It wasn't redemption. It wasn't repair. But it was real. And it was enough. Every story has an ending, but some victories are too quiet for headlines. Have you ever had to grow in silence until the world had no choice but to see you? Tell your story in the comments. And if this series meant something to you like it did to me, like, share, and subscribe. Because sometimes the ones who were overlooked become the ones who lead.